So we are certainly in a wave of innovation when it comes to VR, but previously, the previous wave of like, hey, maybe we can make VR work now, you were there, right? You had founded a company called Sega GameWorks. You certainly worked at Disney a little bit on VR projects there. So can you talk a little bit about what's different now between now and the last VR wave?
Sure. It is, in many ways, quite similar. It's surprising how much the conversations are the same as they were, whatever that was, 25 years ago. We started a group called the VR Studio at Disney, and we did this Aladdin VR attraction to kind of pull our research together. And we were struggling then to build stuff that worked. And I think the difference now is that the building blocks are there. The things work. They're not perfect, far from perfect, but they actually work now, and that's a big thing. And then now there are a number of companies that have invested either an appropriate amount or maybe an embarrassing amount, whatever, a lot of money into VR, and walking away from those investments is really not something they want to do. So there is a sense of momentum now. It's easy, though, to forget, just how long it takes to adopt things. You think about cameras in phones, how long it took from when there was a camera that worked to the point that you stopped taking your SLR around, and it was a long time. And so it's probably appropriate that this will take a similar amount of time to build.
Gotcha. And when you talk about building blocks, so do you think the biggest hurdles currently to VR, do you think they're still technical? I mean, there's certainly a half a dozen technical things you could probably call off right at the top of your head. Oh, I wish this existed, that existed. But do you think they're technical or philosophical? Do you think people are not understanding what it's for, or do you think that everybody knows exactly what it's for, and they just need to hurdle some technical problems?
Well, it's easy when you're in any field. You get caught up in that field, and you think about what is the next big thing? What's the next big hurdle? And it's easy, in VR to think about, well, we need some more resolution. We need some more field of view. We need more polygons per second. We need better tracking, and all those things. And it's easy to hide behind those things that you need, those things that the industry sets up as the next piece in the roadmap, and imagine that, boy, once I get that wider field of view, everything's going to be easy. But in fact, it's not. I mean, it's really always about the idea. One of the things I always do with my design teams is when somebody comes in and starts talking about an idea and they're talking about the technology, I tell them just assume that technology. Imagine that everything you could possibly want is in your hands today. Now, what's the idea? And then often the conversation gets much more difficult because I don't feel like we're there yet of fully understanding what this, we know it's extraordinary, we know it's really interesting, but it's not yet speaking to us deeply in the way that it will.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's a lack of understanding of how the storytelling tools are going to operate in those environments? So let's just take VR for example. Do you think we just don't understand how to tell good stories in VR yet?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was certainly like a phase where everybody was applying completely filmic language to VR. It's like, hey, how do we frame this? How do we block it? Whatever. Yeah. And then there's some sort of realization at some point, maybe that's not the way we need to talk about it, right?
Yeah, there's so many things that when you get it really working, you realize, well, I'm just building a game, and TVs work pretty well for games, and theaters work pretty good for film, and so new things will emerge, and you see little hints of them here and there, but there's still a ways to go. One of the big things for VR for me remains, and it was the same thing a million years ago when we were working on it before, is that isolation. And we're still a good ways away from truly having an interaction that feels natural and normal. And we've demonstrated lots of that, and it's not that it can't work, and it's not that the technology is not close, but it's not smooth yet, so it's not a thing where we can communicate well together, and so that makes it kind of isolating, and that's going to limit it until we're able to fix that.
And those shared experiences, do you think that's the key to like both AR and VR? Is shared experiences something you're focused on?
Yeah, when you think about what our company does, we build places and things that you do with your friends and family, and we will likely take that with us into the new things that we're working on. If you look at the work we've done in the content we've done for The Void, those are multi-person experiences, and when you go to a theme park, it feels kind of strange to be there by yourself. So we are about these shared experiences, and so that that will drive us in this as well.
And do you think that the progress that we measure, like what are the storytelling roadmap, like the signs are like, oh yeah, well, hey, we've reached this roadmap. What do you think is that for VR? Do you think there's a certain experience that says, hey, we've reached a new point along the path?
Well, this is, I guess, fairly obvious, but until it is something that could only be done in VR, or that can only be done that well in VR, we're not there yet. Taking new technology is always, we go get the old technology and we put it in the new technology. I remember in the early days of the internet, the business was yellowpages.com, which was taking books that we used to get, because it doesn't sound like
I get a little bit of mic problem. Maybe it's the connection.
okay.
Yeah.
But taking the best of the old ideas and adapting them to the new technology form, and we've certainly seen quite a lot of that with VR, with taking fairly traditional video games and let's do that in VR, and
right.
and it's neat. I mean, it's interesting, but people who are really into games often take the headset off and just play the game the way they normally played it. And I think that until VR finds those things that can only be done in VR, takes advantage of that thing that you can transport my eyes to a new place in a believable way, we're not there yet. And so we have to get something that is truly fundamentally VR.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not alone. Many people here in the audience have probably had a similar experience where you're in VR, you're experiencing something, and then you'll have like a one defining moment of like, oh, I would not have done this, right, or not felt this. Like for me, it was like I was playing a space simulator, and I found that I could position myself very close to an asteroid, inverted, right? And I said, oh, hey, I can see where it is. The spatial relationships are there. If I had just a first-person view, I wouldn't have been able to execute this maneuver as closely. And so I think there's some question about what that's like for shared experiences. Like what, yes, we could interrelate with one another as humans, or like let's say in Disney parks with characters. Do you view AR, for instance, as a tool that can create those kinds of experiences that they couldn't have otherwise?
Sure. And I think with AR, it will be pretty interesting when we're able to get the tracking right and get to really land things on it. So we truly are starting to augment the real world. We're doing a fair amount of work in that right now, and that is pretty cool because I can do things that are up close. I can share things. I can hand you things. I can really augment the world, and that to me is going to be that's going to be pretty interesting. Installed base is down the road, a pretty long way. I know in the early days of mobile phones, people didn't have smartphones, so we actually had a program where we would hand those out in the parks because we were building applications, treasure hunt things that would use the phones. And we wanted our designers to get experience with that early on, so we actually handed phones out and did that for a long time at Epcot Center in Florida. And we may do a thing like that here. We'll see. It's still a little ways off, but that could happen.
And when you're talking about an AR experience in the park, something that you've tried that you could talk about, have you had any sort of revelatory moments yet with that?
Well, people are. We were doing a thing. There's a demo we have going on that we're bringing people into, and it's a little kind of thing you can create art with your hands, and so we track your hands, and we sit around together, and we're playing with things, and it's fun to watch people start to play. They start to reach over and grab other people's stuff. They start to hand little pieces that they've made to each other, and they, it's nice. We set it up so you're facing each other, so that you are aware of the person there, so that you're not drawn, off to your own little world. And we find immediately as people start to make things with their hands that they want to share them. They want to, and they laugh together, and so it's neat to see this little bubble, this little shared bubble, because people do like to interact with each other. And one of the things that's interesting about if you take VR and AR to some degree as well, when that thing of assuming the technology, if you build this room and it's perfectly this room, it's absolutely perfectly this room, well, we have reality, okay, and we have one of those already. And so you have to actually show up with something other than that, because we already have this. And so allowing people to do things together is kind of a neat thing. You know, if you go on a date, it's nice to go on a date where you're eating together, because that gives you something to do while you're getting to know each other and talking. And I think VR or AR is the same kind of way, giving people, you know, kind of a MacGuffin that draws them through the experience, but then the experience is really, as it turned, you know, when it's finally all said and done, about those two people interacting and getting to know each other. But there's a neat thing that they're doing together, and so that works in the real world, and I believe that kind of thing will work in AR as well, especially bringing story in, but story that involves both people. That's not just you as a passenger. And so much of what I've seen in AR and VR is still leaning too heavily on there's a stage, there are performers, then there's an audience. And I don't think you need VR to do that. I think that's a solved problem. And
Right.
you need to move on to that.
Right. Stages exist, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They work really well. Stage technology is very nice.
Yeah, it's very solid.
Yes.
Holds people up. Yeah.
It's very good.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to that point, like the Void, for instance, you know, the multiplayer VR experience. Certainly, the experience of looking and seeing things virtually is exciting to some degree, especially when you have other sensory things at play, smell and sound and vibration, that sort of thing. But by far the most exciting, interesting thing that happens there is when you have, you know, one person trying to operate a control while you're trying to hold off enemies, and you know, that communication between friends and or strangers, you know, if you're lumped in with a group. So it makes sense that, you know, you'd be able to say create a friction there, an excitement that doesn't exist, you know, in the real world, because you can't play those parts as thoroughly, you know.
Yeah, you also have this kind of funny out of sync feeling that as a content creator, you have all these visions for neat content and everything, but then you realize your audience is saying, tell me again what this thing is. Do I put it on my head? Because it's amazing how many people still arrive at the Void and other locations like that, and it's the first time they've ever experienced VR. And so they're not going to be ready for something that somebody's done this 20 times. You know, the first moment you just think about the first moment all of you put a VR headset on, and it's like, oh my God, this is crazy, this is amazing. Well, you can't tell a story while people are going, oh my God, this is amazing.
Right.
You know, they're busy, they're very busy, they're very task loaded. And so you have to give them a minute, and the experience has to draw them in and let them know. Remember that I've read that in the first film theater experiences, you know, of trains running through the screen, people would run out of the audience because they thought it was real. And similarly, it's going to take a minute to even get the audience up to the point that you're ready to start talking about something that's a bit more complex.
Mm-hmm. Now you've talked before about meaningful versus interesting experiences in the AR and VR. Could you explain a little bit about what you mean there?
Yeah. It's like in film. when you've never seen it before, having a train run toward the camera is pretty interesting. It's pretty crazy. It's amazing. It's overwhelming. But when it's done, then it's kind of done, as opposed to a real film that really starts to speak to me. And you know, the people that create art are able to kind of encode that humanity, that human experience, into whatever technology's in front of them, whether it's a book or a film or whatever. And they encode that in a way that when I experience it, somehow it plugs into my emotions and my brain in a way that feels right to me, and I play out that experience. I live that, and it really speaks to me in the same way a real experience speaks to me. And that, I think, is where we have to get to next. And I'm not saying everything has to be, you know, emotionally draining, but it has to be something. It has to speak to me somehow. It has to trigger that emotional stuff inside of me that lets me believe that something is real. And by real, I mean, you know, if you think of a book has fake characters. None of it is real, but somehow it's emotionally real to me. Somehow it is real in a way. You know, you watch a film that's fictional, and you can pause the film and say, does anyone in the room think this is real? And everybody goes, no, now get away and let me get back to my film here, because it's real to us in an emotional way.
And when you're talking about creating experiences that trigger, you know, some sort of involvement, you know, psychologically, emotionally, as a human, one of the big sort of question marks around AR at the moment is the sort of mechanism by which we interact with it. So there's a sort of shorthand that views smartphones as like a stopgap.
Yeah.
Like, we're looking at this portal, it's showing us what an AR world would look like, but we're sort of just waiting. We're in situ now, waiting for the next thing, which would be some sort of headset or goggle or that type of thing. So how's Disney looking at like AR experiences with a phone? Do you view it as treading water? Do you think language that we learn here will translate forward?
Yeah, it is. I believe when you wear it, it's kind of a different experience. There is a really useful thing in having a smartphone. You can play games with it. We have a lot of games that we now play in our queues with this app we call the Play app, which has a AR engine and
Right.
all the things you'd expect in something like that. And people have fun with it, but it's not. And it does start to tell sort of puzzle-like stories, but it's not really moving toward something that you want to believe is real. It's just neat stuff that you collect and play and trade and collaborate with. But when you put the headset on and the headsets get to the point where they work and there's tracking and I can see other people and the headset's not so big that I can't believe that that's a human. Now we get to the next level, I believe, where it's like you, me, and a third party, a character that together we're working, or you, me, in an interesting place where you and I have this one-on-one experience where it's really you and me getting to know each other and trying to solve something that's meaningful to us, something that this scenario has convinced us that we really need and really want. And now, because we both want it, we have something that we share. And now we're actually going and doing something together that's fun and interesting and maybe the kind of thing that we'd want to come back and do again.
Mm-hmm. And those experiences, one of the things that I've been sort of talking to a lot of people about and thinking a lot about is how we make sure, we sort of saw this happen with social layers, how they kind of grew out of a situation where they had people that were not, it wasn't a very diverse crowd creating those things. Mm-hmm. So they missed some sort of things, some implications that would come across. Now we're seeing the results of that at a societal scale, things like Facebook, Twitter, that sort of thing. Yeah. So how do we go about building virtual layers, AR, virtual worlds and VR, with a diverse and inclusive user base and building base in mind, so that we don't end up A, with the same problems, yeah, and then also B, as I'm sure Disney's cares very much about, having a very diverse and inclusive number of people being able to take part, participate in those.
Yeah. Well, I have probably political leanings that move me toward diversity, but I also have business realities that, when I work for a company that wants to sell things to everyone, it sort of makes sense that you would have everyone there helping to produce those things. And I do find that when I have an audience, my whole career has been one of putting artists and engineers together. So to me, that was an early thing that I did, 25 years ago, and putting them together as equals, truly on the same team, not just saying, okay, let's go build a thing and then go get some content people. It's one thing that the content and the chipset and the tracking system are all one idea. And so it's an easy step to say, okay, that works very well. These people that think very differently, suddenly you get a different result. You get something that actually is different because it is fundamentally about whatever it is you're trying to do, tell the story, to make something that's beautiful. And when you think about bringing people in around you, if it's a bunch of guys, we're going to build guy stuff, and it's going to really make sense to guys, and it's going to make less sense to a whole pile of people, half the world. And there is this fun thing when you get your organization together and you make it work, and it's not trivial to do that, to bring in all these different kinds of people. The reason places often are these sort of boy kingdoms is because it's easy to get, everybody knows what to do. It's like throw a football into a field and everybody runs to it and they know what to do immediately. But we don't have as much experience as a society of knowing what to throw into the field to bring everybody together. And so you have to really designed that as an organization to make sure that not just the people are not just there, but they're there and they feel like they can contribute, they feel
They have
comfortable.
agency of some sort.
Yeah, yeah, and they can speak the language they're familiar with, and then you honestly do get the results that you're after there. It's a very different set of results you get.
Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's about all the time we have. I wish we had about 6 hours more, but I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you all for being a great audience.
Yes. Great. Thanks.